While the Western world, Israel's so-called allies are constantly trying to undermine Israel's already weak efforts at defending itself, Ukraine is doing some pretty amazing things, really amazing considering they are up against a much stronger enemy that when originally attacked, or not originally, but when they started this phase of the war 2.5 years ago, it was assumed that the whole of the country would be taken over in a few days. Well, 2.5 years in, not only has the whole of the country not been taken over, but we hear a lot about assumptions that the eastern provinces are gone and there's no way Ukraine can take them back and there's no way. So this is a big argument from the not too aggressively pro-Russian people in Britain and in the US, but those who say, look, why are we backing Ukraine? In part, they have no chance of winning. Ukraine is teaching us all that when you can't solve one problem in a maybe a the clearest way to solve it, then you just do something that is unexpected. That's what they've done. So yeah, taking back the eastern provinces may not be within Ukraine's current military capabilities with the insufficient support it is getting from the West. So Ukraine decided to take over some chunks of Russia. So there are 74 villages that have been occupied by Ukraine in the Russian province of Kursk. 200,000 Russians have been evacuated from the area. Ukraine is fighting back in a really impressive way, impressive enough that some in the West are complaining about that as well. Certainly some in the so-called anti-war movement, which of course is a pro-war movement. It's just an anti-the West defending itself when it finds itself at war movement. Yeah, this is we will talk about why Ukraine may have chosen this. This clearly didn't happen overnight. We just weren't informed about it. Unlike some other conflicts in the world, Ukraine didn't inform us in advance what they were going to do, and that is the way to go about it. Yeah, Daniel, you live pretty much right next to the Ukraine-Russia border, right? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I live close to Slovakia, Ukraine border. Uh, well, this was surprising, and it's really nice to see it. And as you mentioned, yeah, if this was done by Israel, then Zelensky would let Putin know that they're gonna go to Kursk. They would give them time. They would probably drop leaflets in Kursk, so the civilians could evacuate, and of course, it would mean Russians could bring in actually their troops. But yeah, this is great to see. It shows. It really shows the capabilities you can have if you are not being restricted basically by your allies. If you are, and honestly, in Israel's case by itself, and when the victory is the only thing you are looking at. And I think it's great to see it in Ukraine. It makes sense that it's Ukraine that in a sense can get away with it, because unfortunately the way people look at it, look at the world stage, it's never about what is right or wrong, or who is the party that got attacked and who's the party who's attacking. It's always about who's the stronger one. So because Israel is stronger, it pretty much cannot actually defend itself. But Ukraine is uh, definitely, at least when it comes to how large of a military they have, is perceived as the weaker one, so is able to get away with more. And it's really funny to see. It's really great to watch any sort of Ukrainian memes. People are already some Ukrainians are already saying the referendum in Kursk is already in preparations, so the the people in the area can choose who they want to be with. So all this stuff is really great to see. And I've recently seen, of course, we don't know much about, as you mentioned, we've only learned about the fact that Kursk, that Ukraine is in Kursk much later than it happened. I've read more stuff that apparently Ukraine has broke more offensive line and is going deeper into that region. And yeah, again, I think it's really positive to see. It's really great morale. It is similar to when Israel actually decides to actually do something, when they assassinated Haniyeh, or when they strike into other nations to kill the leaders of Hamas, or when they striked into Yemen, into Houthi territory after the Houthi sent drones into Israel. I really haven't heard from Houthi since. I'm wondering what's going on there. And we've also haven't really heard much from the Russian side. I think I've read something from either some Russian commander that this Ukrainian attack is like unprecedented, or it's breaking all the rules. I mean, it's a joke. Like this, when you're listening to some of the Russian politicians, it is like you're watching some sort of comedy. Like it's ridiculous what's coming out of their mouths. Like they are invading a country, and they are, they have a problem that yeah, that actions have consequences. Like these people, and I think that's almost like a result of the modern philosophy. Like people forgotten that causality actually exists, that when you do stuff, some stuff is going to happen after that. And yeah, they are surprised. Oh god, Ukraine can actually attack us into our own land? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, they sound like Palestinians who started a war and then are surprised that the other side is defending itself, and that they don't actually, in this case, like you mentioned, in this case, they don't actually tell the other side exactly how they're going to defend themselves. They're just doing it, and really well done to Ukraine. I want to thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. I want to read a few comments here. Uh, Bonnie says, I really need to know more about NATO. I was surprised to hear an objectivist defend Putin because NATO was, quote, encroaching on Russia. If this is who I think it is, yeah, I think objectivist is a generous term. I mean, this is somebody who, was an intellectual within the objectivist movement, has gone on to the, let's call it, outskirts, and then onwards of the objectivist movement. And yeah, but it is weird generally to hear people on the sort of pro-America, supposedly pro-freedom side, the side that seems or claims to understand why America is better, hear them defending Russia. This is the side that was the stronger of the two sides of the political map during the Cold War. The side that wasn't generally a fan of détente, was more a fan of doing, showing strength where possible. And now they are literally supporting Russia in a war of expansion that is very, very much like what the Soviet Union used to do. So it's bizarre.
Yeah, if I can just quickly comment on the NATO point, there is the standard reply, NATO is a defensive alliance. It doesn't have a capability of going offensively when there are, let's say, NATO countries that, let's say, collectively attack a nation. Let's say in case of Afghanistan and Iraq, it was a coalition that it didn't just automatically came from NATO. It was a coalition that had to be built. So and then the whole idea about why do we care about what Russia thinks? Russia is an authoritarian, almost a complete dictatorship. Why would they care? They feel threatened. Yeah, they should feel threatened. Like, why are we taking any of their consideration, any of their worries into our consideration? We are a Western world, we are a free world, and if the actions we do are threatening Russia because we are free, because it's clear that the Western nations, the more capitalist nations, the more free nations are clearly stronger. The system clearly has won over whatever the Soviet Union was trying to do. We've won, and they should feel scared because they will never succeed. Authoritarian nations will never succeed. And to the extent they will succeed, it's only because, well, for one, we allow it to happen, as in a sense, which we'll talk about on the reality show, when we help them through things like the United Nations, when we acknowledge that their opinion matters at all, that's the only way they actually succeed. So to that point, why do we care about Russia things?
Yeah. A few more comments. Chandler says an Israeli and a Ukrainian walk into a bar. Daniel is not actually Ukrainian. Also, I'm ex-Israeli. Also, Daniel doesn't drink. Stedman says I heard a report today that said 1,000 Russians have surrendered and are now POWs. That gives Ukraine bargaining chips for getting Ukraine soldiers back. And I want to address that, but also read Regular Shift's comment saying, yes, Donbass region will be almost impossible to recover by force. And I think that is probably the goal of this. You know, they're said that they've been planning this for months. Until recently, it looked very likely that Donald Trump will be president again. He has said he's going to end the war on day one by making some sort of a deal. So it could be this is Ukraine strengthening their hand in the negotiation by saying, okay, you know, you want to keep some of Ukraine, we'll keep some of Russia, or you know, we will give this back and you give back our country or parts of it that you've taken. Um, yeah, that is what I assume they're doing here. Again,
Oh, if I can add on that, because I've been following it, it seems like, yeah, that might be one of the reasons, but there are many reasons. It's probably multiple of them. It's not like there's only one reason. The another more strategic one is that basically Russia has been there was a Russian offensive for a while now, but it's probably gonna stop, or it's supposed to stop at some point, which is in a sense basically what you have now is attrition war, where people are just getting killed, people are dying, people are or getting hurt beyond the fact that they cannot even fight. And in a sense, Russia is winning that attrition war, but it benefits Ukraine if Ukraine is the one basically defending itself and Russia is the one attacking it. But if it stops, that makes it much worse for Ukraine. This incursion into Russia ensures that basically, and it seems like Ukraine is gonna basically make a defensive line inside of Russia, which would mean they would hold on to it and it would just stay Ukrainian for a while, which would basically force the Russians to continue their offensive or change their offensive. It also, if Russia wants to take it back, it needs to take many soldiers from the current offensive lines in the south, which Russia has been actually pushing into Ukraine there. There's also the fact that when it comes to Kursk, it's not actual Russian professional soldiers or volunteer soldiers. It's the conscripts there. If who Russia has tried to separate these people. Basically, Russia has tried to, in a sense, separate the feeling from common Russians that they are at war. So not to conscript them too much, not to basically make them feel like they're at war too much. If you attack conscripts, if you kill conscripts, they will feel it. The civilians on the ground will feeling. And I think that's also an important point. Basically, Russian civilians should realize your government has started a war against an independent nation, against a freer nation. You should know and you should do something about it. You should, and there are many Russians who are somewhat standing up to Russia, but it's not enough. And I think so. There are many points where basically I think this really benefits Ukraine, and I think this is one of the biggest reasons. More Russians have to stand up to Putin if we want to see, if we want to see something better.
Yeah, we talk about war a lot on this channel because there are wars going on, and there could be much worse wars coming soon, or even worse than what could come soon coming later if we don't handle our business. Now, a big part of that, as we say on a daily basis, is the fact that the West isn't eager to fight. In the past, wars were fought to win. Now that doesn't mean that they were fought in like in the right way or that they were just or any of that. But yeah, I mean some of the historical wars are fascinating to study, and one place you can study them is by watching Game of Thrones or reading the books. Yeah, technically, that isn't actual history. There were no, as far as I know, no dragons or dead people. Sorry for the spoilers. But yeah, I was actually surprised. I've watched the series more than once, and I'm reading the books now. And I read Alejandro's article, which is now available on our Substack. There's a link in the chat and in the description, and learned quite a bit about how close it is to, or how much of it was taken from actual history. This is also interesting to judge from the perspective of an objectivist who wrote this article because there's moral issues going on all the time, and you can see kind of what's missing in the approach of the author. I still think it's great shows and books, and I recommend watching and reading them. But I definitely recommend reading Alejandro's article. You can sign up to our Substack and read it. It's available now, as are previous two articles. The next one is coming on Saturday by Richard. So yeah, make sure you sign up for that. And yeah, back to the point. So somebody says in the chat, I love Israel. I don't care about Ukraine. Well, you should care about Ukraine because much like Israel, we at the Ayn Rand Center UK are like most vast majority of the people you see on this channel are not in Israel. We cover this um, on an almost daily basis because of how important it is to us here in the West, how significant it is, and how the way the West approaches it sends a message to the enemies we're fighting in this actual war, whether it's Israel fighting in the war in the Middle East or Ukraine fighting against Russia, to other enemies, to potential enemies, to those who would consider starting a war against any Western country. And the approach of the West, certainly in the Middle East, is very encouraging to anybody who wants to kill Westerners. It is very encouraging to anybody who's considering starting a war because they know that if they start a war, the West either will not reply, will show restraint, will say we don't want a war, or will reply in a way that is uh, might not do more good than harm, in that it shows the other side, look, we're not ready to fight this fully, even in cases where we are stronger. And again, we're doing this episode to point out that Ukraine, which is still as weak as Russia is, and that was something that surprised everybody 2.5 years ago, Ukraine is still militarily much weaker than Russia, and yet it is fighting proudly, boldly, with the full might of its military. And again, the surprise was in the first days when Russia didn't immediately occupy Kiev, and the surprise just continues with Ukraine, holding its own and taking over parts of Russia. So yes, if you don't care about it, you should, because it does affect you directly.
Yeah, and I mean, even I think, yeah, it will impact you directly, but also Russia many times has their hands in the Middle East and has been involved in many of the wars. Usually, the way Russia does it, they don't do it directly. They almost always do it through some private military group, but they are involved, or they are allies of some of their allies of Iran, of China, of North Korea. So you also have to watch out for that. Like you, you know, it might not be that directly Russia will attack Israel, or that Russia will, uh, in a sense, threaten Israel directly, but indirectly, uh, let's say even just from the idea that, like I say, being allies of nations that do threaten Israel directly, but also the fact that such regimes are allowed to exist. Russia is the sitting member of the on the UN Council. Imagine if somehow Russian regime was overthrown, and something better would show up there. You would potentially you could have on the UN Security Council something much better. So far, try to check into past votings. It's not like Russia is ever on the side of Israel. Russia will always go against Israel. Will always go with its allies and vote against Israel. And so yeah, you should definitely care about these things.
Yeah, and regular shift also mentions in this context, Russia and China would love an entire Islamic Middle East. And yeah, it's not just voting in the UN. It is arming these countries. Best Monster says Russia also needs help from Iran and North Korea. Yeah, but the help, goes both ways. And uh, we can also see when we do see those diplomatic, let's call it, moves against Israel, whether it's any UN resolution, whether it's the what is it, the ICJ case against Israel brought forward by South Africa. These are all countries. Russia has its hand in all of these. It is behind so much of the evil that goes on in the world. So yes, this is something that we should all pay attention to. Maybe here on the channel we haven't been paying enough attention to that, and we're just here celebrating when Ukraine does something that is so visibly, fantastic. But yeah, um, again, Israel should be. Another thing is, um, there are limitations placed on Ukraine by its allies, just as there are on Israel. Maybe not as strong limitations. Maybe nobody is demanding that Ukraine send humanitarian aid to Russia, but there are limitations, and this is could be argued a violation of those limitations, although it hasn't really been argued by the U.S., but it has by some others. And but Ukraine is doing it. They didn't consult Biden. They didn't have a phone call with Biden during the latest bombing, and Biden says take the win if not enough Ukrainians died. They just did what they saw an opportunity to do and had to do. Uh, so Israel, by the way, Israel can also learn from Israel in the last 2 months, because it has, as we've mentioned frequently, it has done some bolder operations than anything we've seen before during this war. But yeah, Ukraine is really fighting admirably, and I would hope whatever Israeli leaders have to tell themselves or have to tell each other, they say it. They say, look at Ukraine. They say, let's use the example of Ukraine and say, look, we don't want this war, but it has been forced on us, and we're going to fight it to win. And yeah, if Israel does that, good things are coming in the Middle East.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly comment on, because some people are talking about Ukraine. Some people are bringing up that either it's almost like a failed state, or that sort of like radical parties are in power or something like that. And I think for those people, I think you're missing the point so much. Like, yes, Ukraine is not a perfect state. It has been dealing with many issues. It's a former state of the Soviet Union, similar to Belarus. It had many problems with Russia, mainly because Russia has been trying to basically, similarly to Belarus, basically have a large control over Ukraine. Not to mention, it has been disrupted and invaded by Russia. Not even like during this war, but even before in 2014 when they took over Crimea. Uh, and has only recently started westernizing. Basically for a long time it had basically Russian aligned governments, and has only recently started basically trying to get closer to West, trying to join the EU, trying to basically get better. And Russia doesn't like that. Russia doesn't like the fact that Ukraine is trying to be more Western, is trying to be more democratic. But it's gonna take its time. I mean, there's many nations even that weren't part of the Soviet Union directly, but just part of the Soviet bloc, that also have many problems with corruption. It's a long process, but like looking at this and saying Ukraine has a problem, so Russia can just take over them, or what is the, like, Ukraine has a problems, but Russia is a dictatorship. Russia is a authoritarian nations that we know what they want. We know who is in control there, and looking at this conflict, at basically walking away with, you just don't care what's going to happen in Ukraine when you know there are better elements in Ukraine that are trying to do something better. Do you, I mean, what other conflict do you look at it like that? Like if in the United States, I I don't know what to even compare it to, but let's say a different party that you like is in power now. Do you just give up? Well, America has failed, and you completely throw out the whole experiment. You completely throw out all the good people that are trying for something better because of few bad apples, or even if there's a lot of bad factors in the nation. As long as there are better elements, you support it and you hope for the best.
Yeah, I mean, Russia doesn't like it. Usually means you're probably doing something right, almost as certainly as the United Nations voted to condemn it. Our topic for today's episode of the reality show is the United Nations Security Council, some of the member states on it, why we're listening to them. This topic came about just from me, for whatever reason, watching a big chunk of the Security Council meeting yesterday and being shocked at what I already know is going on. But we will talk about that on the reality show. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, everybody, for watching. The reality show starts in a couple of minutes.